Hello, dear friends. Today we will be going on a whispered journey through time in one fixed point in a city. This is a children's book essentially, but presents a little slice of life in a specific location from 1000 BC throughout the ages, right up to, well, for the book, the present day, which in this case is 2002 when this book was published. So, let's have a look. So here's a little introduction. We're going to imagine we're standing on a riverbank somewhere in Europe thousands of years ago. And we will be, looking out for the baker apparently, who appears in all of the illustrations, and he has bright red hair, so we've got a bit of a Where's Wally, Where's Waldo situation. The immortal baker. So let's have a look then. We start around 3,000 years ago. So here a group of farming people have decided to build a settlement on the banks of a river, and they found a place where the ground is firm and dry, a little higher than marshland further upstream. Trees in the surrounding forest are cut down for firewood, building huts and fences. Flat fertile land where the trees have already been cleared, being good for crops and grazing livestock, and the settlers are hunting animals in the forest or they catch fish and birds. Of course the river is useful for travelling further afield. Nearly everything they need they must find or make for themselves. No shops, so everybody who is able helps makes clothes, pots, boats and weapons. Use bronze, a mixture of copper and tin, to make tools, and wood and stone are still widely used. They make offerings to their ancestors, believing that in return their harvest will be good, spring will return after winter, and that disasters will not befall them. Today the chief is greeting people from across the river who arrive to trade their cloth for grain grown by the settlers. So we have a trading vessel coming here. Somewhat recklessly we have a hunter firing arrows at birds for hunting. I think the chief should probably have a word with this individual. Firing out weapons so close to a trading vessel is probably not the kind of welcome you would want, is it? Here we have a hut for drying fish, some boat builders, pot making, a pottery kiln. Here's our baker, has a bright red hair there, so we've got our first spot of the baker baking bread in this bakery hut. Got a weaving here. There's a stone circle in the distance to give offerings to our ancestors, I suppose, and a ditch. Very basic fortifications. I would say that this settlement is highly vulnerable to any invasion or warring tribes, so they better be careful. So let's move on now to quite a big jump in the future to 120 AD, more than 1,000 years later. This is quite a dramatic shift, isn't it? Because the Romans have arrived. So the farming village is now buried beneath the paved streets and stone buildings of a busy, prosperous town. And as the Roman armies have swept across the country, they've built fortresses, and they found the best place to build a bridge across the river over here. And the fortress was built to defend the river crossing, and a town soon grew up around it. Shopkeepers, craftsmen, merchants all arrived to sell their wares to the soldiers. So the riverside port, it's a prosperous trading town, and a ship is arriving at the quayside, loading up not with goods but people, slaves for sale. And a plot has been hatched by local tribesmen to free them, while some men pretend to scale the walls. A rescue party lies in wait. Interesting, so we have a little bit of drama down here. Here's our bakery, and there's our red-headed baker. He survived the past 1,000 years to be still providing this town with its baked goods. That's dedication. Here are the rescuers. They're ready to launch a daring attempt here. So we've got our warehouse, we've got our tavern, a lookout fortress in the distance, a temple, baths, an amphitheatre. I mean, I know 1,000 years is a very long time, but this is... I wonder how actually gradual or immediate the Roman Empire were in establishing fortifications and towns like this. And how jarring that may have been if you were a local tribesperson who's been living a rather Stone Age way. And suddenly there's all of these buildings. And about 500 years later, of course, the Romans have left. And for a while people have carried on living in this town even though the soldiers have abandoned the fortress. But with no trade, the people have fallen on hard times in AD 620. And one by one they've left their houses and they've started to crumble. A people from northern Europe have arrived and built a village on the edge of the old town. And many of the Roman buildings that are solidly made of stone remain standing, but these new settlers are farming people accustomed to building their houses only out of wood with straw thatch roofs allow them to fall into ruin. It's a blustery autumn day, and today's market held in the square near the newly erected cross has suffered from the rainy conditions. The baker, blacksmith and other village craftsmen are hard at work indoors, and the village thane, the chief watcher's men, attempting to launch their boats. So here we have our bakehouse. He's got a reliable position, this guy, and permanently baking his bread. A blacksmith, we've got weaving, antler working. This to me is potentially one of the most romantic periods in history. Obviously very hard, very difficult way of life, but this concept of your culture, your civilization, having the technological know-how only to produce thatched cottages and wood or straw buildings, and then you've got the far more technologically advanced civilization that came before you that has long since abandoned you. So you've got a home made out of basic materials, but you've got these opulent ruins that you can explore that are so far removed from what your culture is capable of. Must have been such a romantic time for some to be able to explore fortresses and ruins and find items and art, and just really wonder what this civilization that predated you by about 500 years actually was. I mean, I suppose today it would be akin to us having ruins that our town is built around that have advanced AI remnants and augmented reality, and it's a very strange time emerging of the old that was newer than the new. Very interesting time. But about 250 years later, the land now belongs to the Vikings, a people from Scandinavia. This riverside village is perfectly positioned as an inland port for the trading ships, and they've built a new town where the old farming village once stood. They've been very busy. This is a big old town now, isn't it? And like the people before them, the Vikings built their houses not from stone, but wood, and their town is made up of neat rows of cottages with thatched roofs and walls built of wattle and daub, which are woven branches plastered with mud. And only the stone Roman fortress and the town walls survive. So besides houses and shops, the Vikings are full of workshops where potters, leather workers, silk makers, carpenters, metal workers and boat builders busy themselves. Ships, wide-bodied versions of the famous Viking longships, set sail for distant lands with goods such as silk, gold, silver, wine and dyes. With the boat building here, our assembly hall, there's our baker. He's moved slightly up the road to this larger joint. They've got a well here, they've got the old Roman walls. And again, this is what's so interesting, is that these fortifications and walls are so enduring. I think today of the city of St. Albans, which is just down the road from where I live. You know, you have a lot of Roman remnants there in 2023. And you wonder how literate the peoples were of this time, so how much access to history and knowledge would they have had, that there's just these alien structures that are plonked in your town, no matter how advanced you get. Very fascinating to me. years later, and it's become larger and busier. It's a favourable position both as a port and a river crossing. There is once more a bridge over the river that's now built of stone and is attracting more people to live and work there. The small wattle and daub cottages of Viking times have been replaced by these larger and sturdier timber-framed houses with 2 floors rather than just one. And stone from the ruined Roman fortress has been used to build a magnificent new castle, home of the local lord, while the old Roman walls have been rebuilt to provide extra defences for the town. So towering above the tightly packed townspeople's homes is a huge new stone-built cathedral. Today's a market day. People have come to town to buy and sell their wares, and it's also a good opportunity for entertainers, beggars and thieves to make money from passers-by. The air is filled with both the smell of food and animals, and the cries of traders and shopkeepers announcing what they have for sale. So this is in the year 1270. We, of course, yes, can see these houses. These homes have greatly shot up in size. We have our marketplace down here, blacksmith's forge, the bakery. Now he's coming up in the world. He's got a much bigger establishment. Is that him there, or has he left the building? He doesn't look like he has red hair from here. Mystery, he's left the bakery, people. Where is he now? Is he in the marketplace selling his goods? This poor gentleman over here has tried to run off with a carton of milk or something, and his accomplice is running off, pushing a poor woman over. They're being chased by the local constabulary. Got a thatcher working here. Merchant's house, buttery. An inn. What's really interesting is this is in 1270. I think even 100 years before that, in the town that I live in, Epping in Essex, there is a market like this one that takes place on the high street that has been going on every single Monday, uninterrupted from around this time, maybe even slightly before this time. And I think it's only ever not been on for like 1 or 2 Mondays in history for extreme circumstances. So these traditions and social traditions are just so interesting that they can endure. 400 years later, we're now in 1650, so we're looking very different here. And darkness has fallen one summer evening in the mid-1600s, and since our last visit to the city, the population's grown once more. People have become wealthier, and they live in grander, more comfortable houses. Despite the city's prosperity, disease and vermin are still rife, and tonight the plague doctor is going on his rounds. It's been a busy day at the apothecaries, the chemists. Crime's another part of city life. So there's a gang of smugglers down at the quayside. They're about to be surprised by soldiers. And robbers lurk in dark alleys, and fights are breaking out at the inn. It's all kicking off. Meanwhile, the baker retires to bed, unaware that a small fire has broken out in the bakehouse below. Oh dear, our infamous baker. You would have thought with thousands of years' experience to date he wouldn't allow this to happen, but this looks like it's going to be danger, isn't it? We've got our plague doctor here, rather conspicuously moving what looks like a corpse through the streets. That's not very hygienic. I think I read in another history book that one of the reasons for the plague spreading so quickly throughout London was that they believed that cats and dogs were the carriers of it, and they slaughtered cats and dogs in their droves. But of course they're your one ally in killing the rat population, and left the rats to be unchecked, so unfortunately accelerated the process of the plague even faster. Yes, we have this medieval concept here of, or the Middle Ages concept of all of the houses being built on top of bridges as well. Makes me think of the film Perfume, that shows it quite well. The homes all being built along the bridge, and then one of them collapses, of course, because it's not the most stable of foundations. So our baker may be about to ruin everybody's day. Yes, later that night, we have a bit of an issue here. The city is an inferno. It's fanned by an eager wind. The fire has quickly consumed the bakehouse and spread to other nearby buildings. So much dry wood, the whole of the city centre is soon alight. And flames claim homes. The city's guards rescue the barrels of brandy hurriedly left behind by smugglers. Others stay and attempt to fight the fire, but there are neither water pumps nor hoses, only buckets or squirting devices. Some are trying to beat back the flames with brooms. Gunpowder is used to blow up buildings and create spaces between them to stop the fire spreading. And meanwhile the baker looks on, aghast. There he is, that baker, in his bedrobes. I mean, we've all had bad days at the office. Could you imagine looking out onto this scene and thinking, oh, that me. They're making a fire break here, they're blowing up the building. Bit strange to be doing that on the riverside, because you would have thought by the time it reaches there it's got a natural break point anyway. I think I would have blown up these ones or these ones. But there's a little fire squirt beating the flames with brooms. So there wasn't a fire service. The fire squirt was the only means to fight fires, and it wasn't until the 18th century that mechanical water pumps were invented. So the next morning, what's the aftermath? The wife tries to comfort the baker. There he is, sitting in front of his ablaze bakery, destitute and sad. The baker's beside himself with misery, and all around him the city lies in ruins, with only the brick chimneys standing among the charred timbers. Just the walls of a few brick or stone buildings, including the cathedral, have survived. The old bridge was saved from being burned down by the fire break. So I suppose that does make sense then to have broken that there. The rain that eventually put out the fire has stopped, and gradually people of the city return to the smouldering ruins of their old homes and wonder where they'll live now. I mean, this at the time must have been absolutely apocalyptic. Imagine it, and how helpless you would have felt. The Great Fire of London broke out on Sunday the 2nd of September 1666. Only 8 or 9 people died as a direct cause of it. 7/8 of the city, including 13,000 houses and 87 churches, were destroyed. Started at the baker's shop on Pudding Lane and continued until firefighters finally succeeded in putting it out the following Friday. And many Londoners refused to allow their homes to be pulled down to create fire breaks, which made it easier for the fire to spread. I mean, that is a very difficult choice when you're faced with it in the moment, isn't it? It's hard as well to think rationally in such an intense moment. 120 years later, though, it looks like everything's right as rain. Well, you'd hope so after 120 years, but the city's been rebuilt, and it's a busy centre of commerce. The streets are wider, the houses are made of brick with tiled roofs, so if a fire were to break out again, it's unlikely the whole city would burn down this time. A number of people, such as lawyers, doctors, bankers and merchants, have well-paid jobs, and they own grand townhouses or live in spacious houses with gardens on the outskirts of the city. The well-to-do take sedan chairs or carriages to travel through the dirty and often crowded streets, and often vehicles on the road are stagecoaches, which bring people from different parts of the country into the city, where they stay in coaching inns. Thieves and pickpockets roam the streets, and the presence of night watchmen helps to reduce crime. People come to the city to look for work. There are workshops where cloth is made, warehouses where goods are stored, but press gangs and soldiers are always on the lookout to force people to join the army or navy. So here we have the laying of pipes, a sewerage system. Got these grand houses here. There's our baker. He's now relocated to a brick farm building. Good for him. So just this illustration alone demonstrates that actually there are some towns in England that still look exactly the same as this. Obviously the roads and our pavements, you've got cars driving around, but this era, the 1700s, a huge amount of buildings have stayed from this era, and there are these shop fronts, these bay windows, and you've got the kind of Edwardian or Georgian houses as well. This era would have been, what, 1700s would have been, off the top of my head I'm going to have to remember the Monarchs series of books, but I think We're like 100 years on from the Tudor age, so we're now probably in the House of Hanover. So yeah, King George and the like, yes. We now move on to 100 years later, and the industrial age has arrived, and its city's expanded hugely as more and more people have come from the countryside to work in these factories. The invention of the steam engine, which provides the power used by the factory's machines, has come to the railway. There it is, the railway bridge over there, and an iron bridge and brick viaduct carry steam trains into the heart of the city. Gas lighting and underground sewers make the streets safer and cleaner. The old riverside warehouse is now a lodging house for people who have moved to the city. Poverty and overcrowding have become problems. Too many people need to find somewhere to live in a city, and there are too few houses. A problem that still strikes us today, of course. And ships are needed for trade with lands overseas, and are now too large to dock at the riverside, so the quayside is now used by barges bringing goods from the seaports. And on this winter's day, the cobbled streets are full of traffic, horse-drawn carts and carriages. The baker, a street seller, does brisk business in hot muffins. Got a chestnut seller there selling chestnuts on an open fire. Postman, milk seller, drains. Sweep, where's our baker? Where is he selling muffins? Still got the Roman wall there. That stood the test of time and is still hanging around. There's a funeral procession there. Where is our baker? Have you spotted him yet? You're going to beat me to it. You would have thought he'd be around here, right? If he's selling baked goods, because this is where he's usually been. Where is he? Where are you, baker? Well, we've got a department store that's popped up here. We've got toys, hats and clothes being sold. We've got an office place and a chemist. Obviously the tragedy of lodging houses and poorhouses is maybe a topic for another video, but yes, a very difficult life for people in the poorhouses. This is during the Victorian era. And press gangs, I believe, wasn't it the case of in the previous time? Oh, that was the previous time, wasn't it? Press gangs putting a coin in your beer or your drink while you're drunk, which suggests that you've just been paid by the Navy and now you're in the employ of their service. Got a rather apocalyptic scene here because we're in the year 1940 and the war has broken out in the city and it's under attack from the air. Air raid sirens are shrieking their warnings and people are dashing to find underground shelters. Planes are appearing in the skies overhead and are dropping bombs on the city. Powerful surge beams are flitting across the night sky. Soldiers are manning anti-aircraft guns, taking aim at enemy planes. Several bombs have crashed down, and some explode and destroy buildings. Others are fire bombs which cause fire to break out. Firefighters are rushing to the scene with their hoses, and ambulances stand by to take injured people to hospital. Now again, this is another fascinating and hard time for the people of London and the people of large cities and towns across the United Kingdom. I couldn't imagine what it would have been like if you're living your life in the day, and then every night, there's the potential for carnage and doom and destruction. Really difficult. I feel like I would have been living in constant anxiety. I wonder what the mental health issues of the day would have been like. Obviously they wouldn't have been very well diagnosed at that point in time. And this brings us up to the modern day, or at least the modern day in the early noughties. So the city had suffered great damage during the war, but after that many parts of it were rebuilt. And there are many new buildings. There are cars, trams taking people across the city, and some streets are reserved for pedestrians only. Speedboats and yachts are moored along the old quayside. Of course, many old buildings are dating from far back in the city's history still standing. In the castle cathedral and a small house in the city centre that survived the Great Fire is now a museum. Archaeologists are working on a site they've dug down beneath the ground and discovered the remains of the old Viking town, and they can only imagine what it was once like. Of course, we can look back through this book to see the real thing. We've got the advantage. Warehouse converted into flats, so what may have once been just used for storage for grains and barrels, and perhaps been where the poorhouses have been put up, are now probably £3,000 a month rentals. We've got office blocks and glass buildings, and we've got some Vikings are here. Are they ghosts, or are they just rather irritating reenactment people who've just broken into a dig site with a TV crew? I think they need to quarantine that zone a little bit more, don't they? But that is a little trip there through the ages. I find it quite interesting how we unearth things. It takes me back to, I remember going to an amphitheatre in Cartagena in Spain, and what was interesting was that there was a town built up. They peeled back the town, discovered a cathedral from, say, the 13th century or something, and a fishing village or something like that, and then that itself had been built on top of the Roman amphitheatre. So, like, just people building on top of existing things again and again and again, just peeling this huge mound away to reveal history. It's always going to be endlessly fascinating. And although, of course, this is a very child-like book, it is for children, I do always enjoy the visual exploration of history in this way. So I hope you've enjoyed this little run-through of a city through time, and I look forward to having you join me next time. But until then, goodbye.